I'm Sue Brayne, and today we're talking about that old devil Saturn. Personally, because I'm an Aquarian, I really like working with Saturn's energy, and I'm really grateful to it because it keeps my quirky nature with my feet on the ground. But Steve, why has Saturn got such a bad rap?
Remember that before the Romans, Saturn was called Kronos by the Greeks. And it's from Kronos that we get the word chronometer, timepiece. Saturn is old father time. Okay, so it's Saturn's always seen as the taskmaster. And when you think of certain aspects of its astronomy, it's pretty obvious why it's got such a bad rap. First of all, it's the furthest planet that you can see with the naked eye. So straight away, it represents limits and boundaries. Secondly, although it's a gas giant like Jupiter, it's 2.5 times further out than Jupiter. So whereas Jupiter's gas is hot and billowing out, Saturn's gas is ice and compressing in. And near the poles, it condenses at times into crystals, which condense in, giving gravity and density. And of course, Saturn has rings around it, holding in. So it's the antithesis of Jupiter, because Jupiter's billowing out. Saturn's holding in, it's the limits and its structure. And a lot of people, especially when younger, don't like those terms so much.
No. So from what I understand, Saturn behaves differently when we're younger as to when we're older. And I just wanted you to talk a little bit about that.
I'm known in astrological circles for saying, "Oh, Saturn's my best mate." He's a well, I'm not going to swear on here, but he's a total BXXXXXXX. But he's also my best friend. When young, Saturn is seen as restriction, limitation, frustration, blockage, circumstances outside of one's control, authority brought to bear, whether that is father, sometimes mother, teacher, God, the authorities, the bosses, the employers, anyone who seeks to impose boundaries and structures upon oneself. Once we reach a certain age, and that can come as early as 35 with the first Saturn square after the Saturn return. It can come as late as 44, the finale of the Saturn opposition to itself. Most people will then wake up and smell the coffee and realize that it's a hell of a lot easier to live within the boundaries you place on yourself rather than those placed on you by others. At which point, Saturn starts becoming the planet of self-discipline, hard work, clear boundaries, self-structure, more hard work, and ultimately success. Saturn's principle is clear. If you do everything the hard way and you don't take shortcuts, and you do it 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, establish, consolidate, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, establish, consolidate, you will be successful.
It's hard work, isn't it? It's just putting the hours in.
Always.
Taking the lessons on board.
And when you look at the astronomy of it, Saturn's orbit is about 29.3, 29.4 years. And even those people who are just starting astrology would have heard of the Saturn return. And to many people, to those people that don't know a lot about it, it's quite a fearsome thing, because it is common for people as they get into their Saturn return to go through a year of significant challenges where they feel as if the world is weighted against them. And I would be so bold as to suggest that is because they want their cake and eat it. Whereas those who actually go, okay, Saturn's in town, right, let's play by his rules for a year, will then set themselves up for the very long-term future.
I don't know anyone, Steve, who hasn't had a significant experience during their Saturn return. They may not even have recognized it at the time. When they think back on it, it's like, oh yes, that happened around that time.
This is why I say people under 30 are different to those over 30.
Yes.
And those who don't get it right at the Saturn return normally get hammered around 36 when the first Saturn square comes along. And then there's the Saturn opposition around 43, 44, which coincides with the Uranus opposition and the Neptune square. And this is the midlife crisis for many people when they realize they're no longer young. The Saturn return at 58, 59 is a very different thing for most people. Many people will approach their late 50s and go, oh my God, my Saturn return's coming up again. Oh, I remember what it was like last time. I don't want to go through that again. So they worry about it and they do all the hard work necessary in advance. And when the second Saturn return actually comes about, it's surprisingly easier than the first one if you've done all the hard work properly and got clear boundaries and structures in place.
Do you think that do you think there are themes that sort of follow on from the first Saturn return and the second Saturn return? Do you ever think there's a kind of theme that is revisited at a different, obviously, at a very different stage in life?
Yes, I do. And this is perhaps evident in the charts of people who are fortunate enough or unfortunate enough to reach 88 years old and the third Saturn return, which is where you become not just a master, but a professor in the literal sense of the word. You make up the rules when you're that age because you've been around the block so much.
I think that's such a lovely thing to say, because Saturn makes you, it takes you round the block. That's exactly what it does. It makes you grow up, whether you want to or not. You have to understand that it is about, life is about maturing. And some people longer than that, than others to do that.
And there is one classic example of this. For anybody who's watching this, who's a fan of dance, whether you're in Britain or a fan of any of the dance shows anywhere in the world, there is a celebrity judge on most dance shows who's famous in many different countries who epitomizes Saturn. His name is Craig Revel Horwood. He's a Capricorn sun, Capricorn moon, Capricorn rising. And when he sits there deadpan and passes judgment in a critical, sardonic, and down pat way, this is Saturn in action. And very, very occasionally, rarely, he will stand up and applaud and be seen as smiling and happy when he sees that people have done the hard work and that they deserve their plaudits.
And of course, that means more to them than the other judges being, oh, it's all fluffy and lovely. When he says that, whoa, that's kind of like Dad giving you the biggest pat on the back.
Indeed.
Yes. Okay, there's something else I want to talk to you about, Steve, because I think a lot of people get sort of a bit confused about the social planets, and Saturn's one of the social planets with Jupiter. Can you explain a little bit more about Saturn's role as a social planet?
Yes, particularly in connection with Jupiter, because there is a cycle with Jupiter and Saturn. They come together every 20 years. And they're the biggest, they're the hottest and the coldest, the biggest of the gas giants and the coldest of the gas giants, the hottest and the coldest there. And Jupiter's about growth and Saturn's about restriction when young. So they're equal and opposite in so many ways. They are about the extremes. And as we age, we learn to not overreach and overstretch or undercut or undermine, but neither to be too hard and disciplined in ourselves or too lax. So we gravitate towards the middle ground, sometimes unwillingly, as I know to my cost, but necessarily. So in terms, when you deal with Saturnine people, they always are the people who, they're not going to be the life and soul of the party. They'll be the people who do the coordinating and the organizing and the facilitating and the managing. They'll get it all together for everyone else to have a party. And then they'll sit back and watch everyone else enjoying it. And they're not really after thanks, but they do appreciate it when people just come up to and go, thank you, you've done a great job. really appreciate how hard you've worked. That is pleasure enough for Saturnine people.
Mm.
And of course, we get the word Saturnine as a description of behavior from Saturn.
Yeah. I mean, Saturn, it gives us our life lessons. That's how I always read Saturn. So can you say a little bit more about where Saturn is placed in your chart? Is that where the lesson, your life lessons really are focused on with Saturn? I know with the progressions and the transit, things change, but is that where we have to really put our focus and say, what have I come here to learn?
Saturn changes sign just under every 2.5 years. So you can't say that 2.5 years worth of people having Saturn in a particular sign are going to manifest behavior in a certain way. There are certain traits that you can associate with Saturn in a sign, but they're very, very generalized. However, Saturn in the house of the zodiac in your horoscope, which you obviously need a time of birth, is much more significant, and it shows the areas where you will struggle when young. Then you will learn some hard lessons, and if you do it right, you will then thrive and prosper. And 65% of those people will be learning those lessons in the outside world through interaction, through events and circumstances in the outside world. The other 35% who are born with Saturn retrograde in that house will learn those lessons internally through their own internal appreciations as they age.
That's interesting, because Saturn is also the manifester. That's how I've already, it brings events or people into your life to teach, to trigger those lessons. Is that how you would read that?
Yes, I wouldn't call Saturn the teacher, I'd call him the examiner.
The examiner.
But Jupiter's the teacher, but Saturn's one who will examine how much you've learned, how much you deserve to progress. And Saturn is never judgmental, not really. He'll just say, okay, you've learned so much, therefore you're suited for this particular role or occupation. And obviously, the more you learn, the better the role and occupation will be.
Yes.
I'd like to change tack just a little bit, just for a minute or two, because the astronomy of Saturn, we've always known that Saturn's got a 29.5-year orbit. We've always known that Saturn's got rings around it. But in the last 20 to 30 years, we've been privileged to see an explosion of solar telescopes and satellites and probes. And we've now got some spectacular pictures of Saturn. So what's very, very unusual about Saturn that is replicated to a lesser extent on Jupiter, but on no other planet, is its polar regions. Now, I want to show you a couple of 4 pictures. I've got 2 pictures of Jupiter's south pole.
Are you talking about Saturn or Jupiter?
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Correctly, Saturn.
Yeah.
This is Saturn's south pole.
Oh, wow.
So as you can see, there's concentric circles, but when you look in, one's in color, one's in black and white, they're the same picture. But when you look at the very center, there's that little ring in the center on the south pole. And I do have a close-up of this.
Gosh, it looks like it's a storm.
It is a storm. And here's a close-up. Once I've shown you this, I'm going to have to pick it up if I can. Okay. Yes.
Wow.
And that is the storm at the center of Saturn's south pole. And it is a vortex heading into Saturn. So it's like a plug hole almost.
Yes. And going inwards.
Yes. As opposed to rising outwards. Yes. I believe so. Yes.
And that's what Saturn makes us do. It makes us go inward.
Yes. However, Saturn's south pole is nothing compared to its north pole. Saturn's north pole has something truly amazing. Look at this.
Oh my God.
Saturn has a hexagram at its north pole, a 6-sided shape. which sometimes the corners are rounded in this position like this, and there are pictures where the hexagram is much more clearly defined, but it is a hexagonal structure, 6-sided shape.
Isn't that bizarre?
And that is I've never seen anything like this in any other type of planetary phenomena. And in the center of that hexagram, there's a little black circle, and I've got a close-up of that as well, I hope.
It's magical watching and seeing these pictures, isn't it? To think that out there in our, you look up to the sky and you see Saturn in the, in the far, 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 far.
No, I've lost
our
that
galaxy.
picture.
And
No, I haven't got that picture, but
it's fabulous.
Yes, it really is. It really is. Yes, I found it now. Hang on a second. How can I share this with you? Right, let's try that. Technology is a wonderful thing when it works. Here we go. This is what's really at Saturn's North Pole.
Whoa.
That is a gigantic hurricane.
Oh my goodness me.
Approximately the size of Africa or Australia.
Good Lord. Absolutely incredible. It's just so fascinating, isn't it? This sort of sense of how Saturn, sort of when you think about how it manifests its energy with us here on planet Earth, going through Saturn lessons it can be like a hurricane going inwards. It can feel very dodgy and depressive, actually. A lot of people
can be, yes, it can really upset things. And remember that in the original Greek mythology, Saturn was the most human of the Titans. And Saturn overthrew his father, Uranus, the sky god.
Yes.
And castrated him and did everything. And all his brothers and sisters, the other Titans, the Hesperides, the Cyclops, the Medusas, Saturn cast them into Tartarus, or Hades, as it was then, because they were too ugly or too out of control. But when you look at those pictures of Saturn's poles, and you realize that even in what appears to be stable situations, there's still a bit of chaos. And Saturn has the Titans, and of course, then there was a Titanomancy, where the Olympians, Saturn's children, fought the Titans and eventually won.
Yes, and then Jupiter was one of his lot.
Jupiter was his youngest
who overthrew him.
Yes.
It was they were a dodgy lot, weren't they?
They really were. Lots of men doing rude things to their fathers. Yes. Yes.
And then Saturn ended his days actually in becoming the god of farming.
Yes, because
which is really interesting. And the side, but we don't really necessarily connect him with that. We're more like, oh God, he's this taskmaster, and Saturn comes, it's coming onto my son or something. I'm going to live in dread. And I think we realise it's about sowing
seeds. Manifestations of him on church bell towers as the skeleton in the cowl with a scythe over his shoulder. I prefer to see him in that category as the character of death in most Terry Pratchett books.
You love your Terry Pratchett.
But I've got every single one of them. And to me, death is, well, as you know, death to me is not the way it's been represented. It's just a transition of consciousness. And to me, Saturn is the gatekeeper.
Absolutely.
And bearing in mind that beyond Saturn, we know there are other planets, but we can't see them with the naked eye. So Saturn is the gatekeeper, the border patrol, if you like, between the visible and the invisible, the conscious and the unconscious.
I think if we open up to him and not be so frightened of the bad rap he's got, then actually we're inviting maturity into our lives and how to become an elder. I mean, that's where I'm going with Saturn at the moment, becoming an elder and really enjoying that journey. I certainly couldn't have done it when I was younger. Steve, I'm just curious about Saturn. Soon will be moving into Aries.
Oh, yeah.
So on a collective level, and obviously it will affect us all personally too, but on the collective level, how are you interpreting that?
It's the start of a new 29-year cycle, obviously, because any planet crossing the 0 Aries point initiates a new cycle.
Mm.
And this is something that happens every 29 years. So on its own, it's not a big deal. However, this time round, it is a very, very big deal, because Neptune will also be transiting into 0 degrees of Aries at the same time. And there will be a conjunction of Saturn and Neptune. I believe it is March 26, maybe February 26, at 0 degrees of Aries, the very start of the whole zodiac.
Mm.
So to me, this is, and this hasn't happened before. I've traced it back 8 to 10,000 years using my laptop, and I've never seen a Saturn-Neptune conjunction at 0 degrees of Aries before.
Wow.
Never happened.
Wow.
It's human history. So this is a whole new ball game. And because it's happening at the very start of the zodiac, it tells me that there's going to be some absolutely humongous changes at the social, in terms of the social order. Because Saturn-Neptune conjunctions inevitably bring changes in political and social order situations. We can trace them back hundreds of years and find similar cycles and patterns in history. But because it's at 0 degrees of Aries, this isn't just going to affect individuals or individual countries, it's going to affect the whole globe. So I think we're on the cusp of a whole new world order. I know that sends shivers down many people's spine, and I don't see it in terms of banks or corporations running the roost. I see it as a time of...
With Saturn, with Neptune involved, do you feel it's going to be more of a spiritual metamorphosis, or
We can hope.
we can hope, can't we? Let's hope.
I think the words, I think that what I'm looking for is a much greater degree of social responsibility.
Yes.
For individuals to take responsibility for their actions and their beliefs and thoughts, and the impacts those thoughts, beliefs, and actions have on the world around them.
And it could be grounding consciousness, couldn't it? I always think Neptune is connected so strongly to consciousness, the unseen. But with Saturn there, let's hope we become more responsible human beings.
Neptune is also very strongly connected with environmental concerns.
Yes.
And I suspect that the environmental situation is
critical.
It's not going to get better.
Well, things are definitely changing on that level too, and we're all of us, we're facing enormous changes that we have no understanding about the outcome. We can imagine it, but we just have to ride the wave with this and just be as conscious as we possibly can about what responsibility means to us personally, and that should feed that into the collective rather than being terrified and running away from everything
and abdicating responsibility to someone else.
Yeah. Steve, is there anything else you'd like to say about our friend, rather than that old devil? What about our lovely friend Saturn?
I think that's going a bit far. Mr. Misery Guts sometimes, but Saturn is so clear in his message to everyone. He says, look, don't try and make me the nice guy. I'm not a nice guy. I'm not a nasty guy. But my message is clear. If you do it my way, you are guaranteed success. Guaranteed. But his way is the hard way.
Yeah. Yeah,
do it
I just want
properly.
to just add something to that, which I think is really important for a lot of people because they get really frightened about Saturn, for example, conjuncting their sun or doing whatever, hard aspects or whatever. And a lot of people get sort of do have depressive episodes. And I think both of
Yes.
us would agree if that happens, just get some help.
Either get some help if you're feeling overwhelmed
Yeah.
or undernourished, undernurtured. Yes, of course, get help. But then that's the beauty of studying astrology. You can see, why am I feeling like a dog's dinner? Oh, Saturn's on my moon. Oh, that's going to be around for 9 months. So I said,
Mm.
right, so you've got a choice. You can either spend 9 months bitching, whinging, complaining about how tired you are, how exhausted you feel, how unsupported and alone you are. Why is my life so crap? Nobody loves me, poor me, which is what most people do. Or you can go, right, Saturn's in town, 9 months, right, nose to the grindstone, bloody hard work, 3
Yeah.
steps forward, 2 steps back. Let's do it properly. And you do that, you put in place roots and foundations, which will then act as the bedrock for the next 29 years. Worth doing.
Worth doing. And on that note, thank you, Saturn, for all your
Yes. Thank
your
you.
lessons. What would we do without you?
Thank you. This is why he's my
You-
best friend in a weird
He's a
way.
pretty good mate to me too. Okay, well, we'll see everybody next time. Thanks a lot, Steve.